All right, welcome everybody. BJ Lisco here from Youngstown Studio and also Is Jericho. Our guest today is a combat sports reporter for ESPN, specializing in mixed martial arts. He's also the author of the new book, Say Hello to the Bad Guys, How Professional Wrestling's New World Order Changed America. Please welcome Marc Raimondi. Marc, how are you?
What's up, man? How's it going?
Hey, man, going great. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to do this, man. And excellent book here, man. But like I said, I got sent a copy earlier this week. I've probably gotten through about 3/4 of it in pretty short order. I love this era of professional wrestling. I grew up right in it. I assume you did too.
I did, yeah. I started watching wrestling in like 1990, and I mean, I'm the prototypical 90s kid, so I was just obsessed with the 90s wrestling from the NWO, WCW to the Attitude Era and beyond, and I'm a lifelong fan. And I think that we always have a connection to like the wrestling that we grew up with. And for me, that is that era.
Nice, man. Nice. So when did you first decide that you wanted to do a book on the NWO?
I think it was like before the idea of a book was like ever conceived. I've long been a fan of wrestling, like I said, but I've always wanted to kind of like express how I feel about wrestling. And how I feel about wrestling is like that it's everywhere. I can see wrestling in everything. There are so many things that in American culture that you can see. And if you know about wrestling, it resonates with you as like being a mirror or a parallel to wrestling. From music to, sports, to cable news, to politics, right? There's so much wrestling, I feel like, that is there, that is influenced by. And then I wrote an article for ESPN.com when the NWO went into the WWE Hall of Fame. And I wrote it with like a lot of like heart and soul, because again, that's like my childhood. That's like my time period of wrestling. And a year and a half later, I get an email from an editor from Simon & Schuster, the publishing company. And they're asking me if I want to write a book about the NWO because they saw my article on ESPN.com. And they basically wanted to turn it into a book. And of course, I said, yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Nice, man. That's awesome. So, excuse me. But yeah, so during your research and everything for the book, what were some of the most surprising things that you discovered that perhaps you might not have known, kind of going into the project?
One thing that I did not know at all was that no one knew who the designer of the NWO logo was for nearly 30 years. No one knew who the exact person was. The narrative that has been given so many times is that it was Disney, or it was Disney MGM Studios, and I never really thought more about it than that. But when I was interviewing Neil Pruitt, who was one of the producers of WCW at the time, while we were talking, he was like, "You should really see if you can find the person who designed the logo." And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Like, I didn't know that person was like missing.
Mm-hmm.
So that became like my goal. That became like, all right, I need to find this person somehow. And I did. It took me a few weeks and a lot of reporting and a lot of cold calling people that thought I was probably crazy. But I eventually did. I eventually did find out who she was, and she's a real estate agent now in Winter Park, Florida. And she had no idea really that the NWO blew up to such an extent, and then it was her logo that did it. But just a cool part of history that had been missing, and I'm glad that she's kind of like now sort of getting credit for doing that. Back then, she was just like a 27-year-old woman working at a post-production office at Disney MGM Studios in Orlando. But yeah, just one of those things that was like lost at the time, and I was able to piece things together and find her.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. It's kind of crazy that she just kind of did that as it was just like a quick thing that she threw together, and she never even got paid for it, right?
Yeah, she was just doing her regular job. It was just a random day, right? Just like anyone else, just at the office, you get assignments during the day, you do them, and you move on to the next thing. And that's kind of what the NWO logo was for her. For all of us as wrestling fans, that is an iconic logo. It means so much to so many people. And for her, it was just like, all right, just one thing that I did on Tuesday, then I moved on to the next thing.
There was a similar thing that happened with AC/DC, right? So the guy got the guy who designed the AC/DC logo that's on everything did it for like he was part of some he was like an art department or whatever, and he did it for like a one-time like super small commission, and now that logo is everywhere. I mean, at least he got paid something for it. But it's crazy that she probably could take that up legally if she wanted to make a few bucks after the fact.
First thing that she asked me, BJ, was like, she was like, so how many T-shirts did they sell of this logo? I'm like, Jenny, you don't want to know the answer to that question. It's gonna make you feel very bad.
Right, no doubt, man, no doubt. So, what's been the reaction to the book from some of the main players sort of involved? Like Hogan, Bischoff, and Nash specifically.
The only person that I've really heard from is Eric Bischoff, and he's been very positive about it on his podcast. I have not heard from anyone else. I don't know if they'll ever read it. I'm not sure. I have no idea. But I was not able to interview Hogan. I did interview Kevin Nash on the phone. I wanted to do more with him, but it just didn't work out. He's things in his life have been pretty hectic over the last few years, of course, as many of us. So I get it totally. So yeah, I haven't heard from many folks. During the process of the book, like so many people were very really, really helpful with their time. The Sean Waltman, Conan, Scott Steiner, Bell Bagwell. So many people and people behind the scenes of WCW that I spoke to. Everyone was really, really kind and willing to chat. The one thing is it was a long time ago, right? So it's hard. So most people told me I don't remember that happened 30 years ago. I'm like, I know, but let's still talk about it.
Yeah, right. No doubt, man. Kind of describe the mainstream scope that the NWO had at that time when it was sort of at its peak, because I feel like the people that didn't sort of witness that firsthand, and then maybe are younger wrestling fans, don't know just how big of a cultural thing that was.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain to maybe some of the younger fans how big of a deal it was, because in today's age there's so much technology, and it's hard to break through the white noise of the devices and the screens and everything that we use. But back then it's so when Hulk Hogan turned heel, it was a Sunday night and I was 11 years old, and I went to day camp the next day. I'm from Queens, New York. And I went to camp, and literally every person was talking about Hulk Hogan turning bad, turning heel. It was such a big deal because he was the most recognizable face in the history of wrestling at that point. He was like a household name in this country and beyond, right? Even internationally. And he had always been known as the ultimate good guy, the ultimate hero, the ultimate baby face, the red and yellow, the say your prayers, eat your vitamins, and so on and so forth. He was in so many movies and everything. None of them did incredibly well, but he was very well known. And then when he turned bad, it was really a viral moment before viral was even a thing, because there was barely an internet and there was no social media. But through sheer word of mouth, literally just people would just get on the phone and call their friends that you got to watch, Hulk Hogan just turn heel. That doesn't happen nowadays, right? Because we're just tweeting or we're putting on Instagram, but that's how it spread. And at the height of the NWO shirt was every time you went out, you saw one, and if you went out to the mall in 97 or 98, you were going to run into someone wearing an NWO shirt the way that you would see someone wearing a Supreme shirt now, or a very common, a Nike shirt. It was very common. It was like a hip, cool brand that wore, even people who were not even necessarily wrestling fans, it was cool.
Yeah, I remember. I'm 43 years old, and so but there was a little period there in the beginning.
You look great, BJ. You look fantastic.
Oh, thank you. But so there was a little period there in the early 90s where it was WWF got real sort of, it was getting kind of corny, you know what I mean? I was way into wrestling as a kid through the 80s, and then when the early 90s, I'm kind of not into this, but I do remember when Hulk Hogan turned heel, everybody that had gotten out of wrestling, all my friends, all immediately got right back into it, because it was holy shit, and then that just led into the Monday Night Wars, and where it was just, all of us going back and forth, watching different episodes and flipping back and forth on channels. I mean, I assume you and your friends probably were flipping back and forth on channels and stuff during that whole period too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and look, I mean, you make a great point because before the NWO, it was extremely uncool to be a wrestling fan because
Hmm.
of content. It was not this cutting edge content. It was pretty hokey on both channels, right?
Yeah.
WCW as well, and the WWF. It was 95. That era was like they had some talented wrestlers, but they were rolling out like the Goon, like the wrestling hockey player,
Yeah. Hmm.
EL Hopper, the wrestling plumber, like Duke the Dumpster Drosy. Like those were like the mid card characters in WWF at that time. So when the NWO came along, it was so much cooler and more authentic and grittier and edgier than anything that was happening in wrestling at that time. And
Hmm.
that was what and then it became like instead of almost hiding the fact that you're a wrestling fan, then it's like everyone's a wrestling fan because it's so cool that you need to be a wrestling fan just to keep up with what the cool kids are doing and talking about at school. And that
Yeah.
was a unique experience for me because I was a fan like in the early 1990s, where it wasn't very cool, but I was obsessed with it. And then all of a sudden, this era happens in '96, and it's like, oh wait a second, even like the cool kids at school are talking about wrestling now. This is like the thing, and it was kind of a crazy cultural moment.
Yeah, and it was kind of crazy how fast it crossed over into the mainstream, where you had, you highlighted in the book and stuff too, where you had all the celebrities started coming over. You had the Jay Leno's, the Dennis Rodmans, the NBA Finals intertwined with the NWO, which was crazy. I mean, you think about that at the time, but yeah, that happened in relatively short order. That it went from, not a lot of people were watching wrestling or taking it very seriously. Just suddenly it was like back, as high as, arguably in one of the highest points that the business has ever been.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that maybe like today's current fans, younger fans would understand, it's this. I think in '98 and '99, the Monday Night Wars, Raw and Nitro, were cutting into the ratings of Monday Night Football. That's
Mhm.
how big it was. Monday Night Football went down 10% in '98 because of wrestling.
Yeah.
And there were more than 10 million people watching combined both shows on Monday nights back then. So
Mhm.
that kind of puts into perspective just how like it was a pop cultural phenomenon. It was
Mhm.
truly part. It was mainstream. It was truly part of just what the country was doing at that time. What was popular.
Mhm. Where would you rank the NWO in terms of all-time factions in wrestling?
Number one. Number one.
Number
Number
one?
one. I don't think there's a question. I don't think there's a question because the way that I see the NWO is we were talking about like early '90s, right? The
Yeah.
wrestling business, not the creative itself wasn't very good, but the business wasn't good.
Mhm.
WWF was just coming up the steroid trial. They took a major hit financially and reputationally, right? Because it just wasn't a good PR look for them, that whole trial and whatever, the implications might have been of that trial. And WCW was always just second rate promotion. And, they had talent again, of course, but they were not considered anywhere close to the level of WWF. And also, they were never profitable. They never really made money.
Mhm.
So that's what the industry was like in like '93, '94, really struggling financially. Both sides not doing all that well, and then the NWO comes along, and it's the catalyst for what ends up being the biggest boom period of our lifetimes. And
Mhm.
that's why I think that as many great factions as there have been, from DX to the Four Horsemen to even I would say the Bloodline, which I think was incredible for a long period of time in WWE recently. Nothing can top the NWO for me because they almost like saved the wrestling business at that time.
Mhm. So here's a hypothetical for you, and I know they like doing this on Eric Bischoff's podcast a lot too. So what if Sting was the third? What if Sting had been the third man? If that had gone through, does the NWO get as big as it does without Hogan's involvement and that sort of shock moment? I mean, it would have been shocking, I think, if Sting was the third man too. But I'm not, my personally, I don't think it's on the same level as what happened with Hogan. But what are your thoughts? I mean, would the NWO have still been as successful or maybe near successful if Sting was the third man?
It couldn't have been, right. It couldn't have been because it wouldn't that heel turn would not have made as big of a splash because as popular as Sting was, again, Hulk Hogan was a celebrity. Hulk Hogan
Mhm.
was a household name. He was in movies. He was on television. He was part of the cultural zeitgeist. Everyone knew who he was. So him turning was really like massive deal. And if it was Sting, it could have been a great professional wrestling storyline, a great angle, a good storyline, something that did good business. But with Hogan, it became a phenomenon. It became, a cultural milestone. It became something that transcended the wrestling business. And if it was Sting or someone else in that place, I don't think it gets to that level because of who Hulk Hogan was at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Hulk Hogan had the sort of the mainstream appeal because even if people didn't know necessarily professional wrestling anymore at that time, they still knew who Hulk Hogan was just from how big he was, in the decade prior.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, because he was, people forget that WrestleMania 1 was massive. That really hit like the mainstream, and he was again someone that was in movies, and he did all the big, the big talk shows, morning shows. Like he was everywhere. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. No other wrestler ever has been on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He was a really, really big deal, and for him to turn heel like that in that way was really just something that it caught people by surprise. I mean, just look at that reaction, right? At Bash at the Beach in '96. Everyone in that crowd knew that pro wrestling is not. It's a story. It's storytelling. It's characters. It's a script. These guys are not. This is not real, right? Yet the emotion was real, right? They were furious at that moment at Hulk Hogan for saying the things that he did after all those years of being like their guy, right? Of being the number one babyface. And they started throwing stuff into the ring. Someone even tried to jump into the ring himself.
Yeah.
It was a horrible idea because
that's drill.
Freaking huge human beings. Like, are you kidding me? Are you crazy?
Right.
That was like, that organic reaction was so special. Like, that level of heat was nuclear because of that. And again, in '96, where everyone already knows that wrestling is fake. I don't like using the fake word, but that it's predetermined. It's a show. It didn't matter because that's how well done that angle was and how much that meant. That even though it's not real, the reaction is very real.
Yeah, Bobby Heenan added some credibility to that too with what he was saying because Heenan had ripped on Hogan for years and years and years, and then he's like, "I told you this guy was a scumbag." You know what I mean? Like he got to follow that up, and it was just like, wow. I mean, it added another level to I was already a huge angle, but that added another level to it for me, and I'm a huge Bobby Heenan mark to myself anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as you should be because he's incredible. But yeah, the whose side is he on was like. That pissed some people off in WCW because no one really knew that the Hogan turn was coming. It was a shock, and they thought that it might have undercut it. Of course, it didn't. It didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't at all. And Heenan was just being, like you said, true to his longtime character, who hated Hulk Hogan more than anyone.
right, 100%. And so, Bischoff has referred to the fall of the NWO and WCW. I mean, as a company, is sort of death by a thousand cuts. From your perspective, I mean, what do you think ultimately led to the downfall? First of the NWO, and then to WCW.
I mean, the NWO. It was. I think Starrcade '97 was kind of the first chink in the armor, right? As far as like that storyline went, I thought '97 WCW was just phenomenal. The way they built Sting up. And it was so clear, right, that Sting had to go over in that match. Like, that was the thing.
Yeah.
I know that maybe he wasn't in his best mindset at that time, or even physical, from a physical standpoint, either, Sting. But still, like, you invested so much in building him up. You have to pull the trigger on putting him over for real, not in a half-back way. The fans really wanted him to win that. And it just didn't happen. And then the follow-up to that was even more of a debacle. People forget, man, like, Starrcade '97 is what everyone talks about, right? The Nitro after, the next Nitro, they did a rematch, Hogan and Sting again, and it went off the air before the match ended. And they didn't show the finish of the match until the debut of Thunder a week and a half later as basically a ratings ploy. Like, we'll show you on this new show, a week and a half later. What an FU to the fans that were sticking by you for so long. What a way to tell them that, they did not matter. Like, all that credibility that you built up, in '96 and '97 with the NWO and then Sting story arc. And then you do Starrcade '97 followed by that. I mean, just like as a fan watching that, how do you say, like, you can't trust them anymore? Come up with like good stuff because like they did that. It's almost like a betrayal of your investment in time as a fan and your hard-earned money at times as well. So that was a big one to me. And then I always say that the Wolfpack breaking off to me is kind of like the ending of the NWO, at least the first story arc of the NWO. And what I mean by that is the storyline was always an invasion. It was a takeover. These guys are coming from the outside, trying to take over WCW. And then once the Wolfpack split off, then it was just kind of like an infighting between the two groups, the two NWOs. It was like a civil war. And it no longer became about taking over WCW and, making everyone, NWO. It kind of lost like that. It lost like the plot in a sense. And look, I don't mean that like necessarily in a bad way, because the Wolfpack was hot. I loved the Wolfpack as a kid. They were great baby faces, but to me, that was like the kind of the end of the NWO angle as it was supposed to be and meant to be, because then it was no longer like a takeover.
Yeah, I remember toward the latter parts of the NWO, like just randomly, it seemed like every week that it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Like they kept adding people, and it was like, okay, well, like it took away sort of the credibility of the top guys in it when like literally it was like, all right, everybody's in the NWO now, or there's just so many people here, and it just I do remember that even being as a kid being like why is this guy here? like this guy's not on the same level as the original guys.
Completely. And you have to realize like what like how they were viewing things then is so different than how we look at it from now. Excuse me. So at that point in time, they were thinking of the NWO as like having its own show, almost being like its own like sustained promotion. And to do that, you needed, you had the main event guys, right? You needed mid partners, you needed guys, to take pins once in a while. And that's why they started to add more and more, because they envisioned it as being it's almost like its own contained show. Of course, now when we look back at it, it's like, no, that was not going to happen. Like that was not the right move to make. That was not really well thought out, but that's how they were thinking about it at the time. So that's why it got bloated. And then the other issue too was like every person in WCW wanted to be in the NWO because they were the only ones that were getting over. They were the ones that the creative team was focusing on. So just from like a business standpoint, if you're a babyface in WCW, you want to attach yourself to the hottest thing, and that was the NWO. So there were people like begging to be in the NWO.
Yeah, Cheeto. What sort of trademarks or elements of the NWO, do you still see today, both in pro wrestling and in pop culture?
Great question. So I think that as far as like the 90s and the NWO goes, I think that one of the big things that came out of that time period, and the NWO was right in the thick of it, is just like Americans' love for the anti-hero, or even for the villain in some cases, right? We really have this love affair with anti-heroes and villains in pop culture and beyond, I would argue, right? Gangsters, mafiosos, like John Gotti, these people become celebrities essentially for just like doing bad things in a charismatic way. And that's what the NWO was. They were doing terrible things, right? They were beating people up with baseball bats, but they were funny about it. They were compelling, they were charismatic. And I think that era is what led to a lot of things like in this country where, charismatic figures who maybe they do bad deeds, but they're compelling, they're fascinating. And I think that really, the NWO was kind of at the cusp of that movement, and you still see it today. You really do. Like, so much of our art, so much of our entertainment is like based on the villain being the protagonist now. And it never was before that. So much so that like when the show Ted Lasso came out a few years ago, and people were like, oh, it's just like a wholesome show about like good people. And it's like oh, what a unique concept. Like, no, that was actually what television was like in like the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, right? It changed in the 90s and it never went back. But Ted Lasso was like this novel idea, like, oh my God, it's not, these people are not complete, lunatics or like, gangsters or meth dealers, or you know what I mean? Like it wasn't Breaking Bad or The Wire or The Sopranos. It was like this wholesome show. And the truth is that was actually how TV used to be. It was kind of a throwback more than anything.
Professional wrestling, and again, Mark, thank you so much for the time. One more quick one here, and I'll let you go. But, professional wrestling, every once in a while, like I said, there'll still be small nods to the NWO in various ways and various storylines and stuff. But could you ever see like a reboot of the NWO, or could you ever see that maybe that brand being successful again with the right people, possibly?
I don't think so, man. I have a hard time envisioning what that would look like. And I've been asked who would be like your NWO like today? And I just don't have a good answer for that, because I think we just can't replicate what that was in that time period. It was so of the time. It was really just like a convergence of different factors, from Hall taking the chance and leaving the WWF, right? Nash's charisma and his humor and his intellect, Hall's creativity. And then you combine that with Hogan's star power and his savvy about what the audience wants and how to deliver it to them, and you took those three things, put those three guys together, and it created like this thing that really can't be duplicated. Because look, they're like, I mean, you need like an invasion type of deal. So like now there's two promotions, right? There's AEW, of course. So and then you also the other thing too, man, is like the internet is so big, the social media is so big. Like we all know kind of what's going to happen before it does. It's so hard to surprise fans these days. And Hall showing up on Nitro was a surprise. The whole thing, Hogan turning was a shock, and that's so hard to do today because of like just our social media and our technology and stuff like that. So I just don't think it could be duplicated again. I think the Bloodline was incredible. Bloodline was such an incredible long-term story, and there are, I guess, comparisons to the NWO just because of the faction like the NWO was. I think it's very different in so many ways, but that's like the closest thing that I could think of where it's like, if you could just commit to telling a good long-term story with a plan, and lay it out with the right cast, the right characters, the right wrestlers, and like the right angles and stuff, you can catch like that lightning in a bottle where it becomes a popular money-making, drawing storyline faction. And the Bloodline did that. But to do like another NWO, it's like, it just can't happen.
Yeah, no, I got you, man. I got you. Well, Mark, I'm gonna let you go with it, but thank you so much again for the time. Once again, everybody, say hello to the bad guys. It's out now. How professional wrestling's new world order changed America. Marc Raimondi, thank you again so much for the time, brother. Best of luck in promoting and selling the book, man. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
All right, cheers, brother.
Take care.